everybody. This is 𝗁𝗀𝗃𝗁 from Creating Purpose with Pao, and I welcome you to the Spanglish World Network and Heart Network on Single TV channels 250 and 251. Please remember to download Single TV on the respective app stores. The app is totally free. You can find Single TV on Google Chromecast, on Amazon Fire TV Stick, Roku Stick, and all smart TVs from 2016 and forward. Thank you for being here. Today I have an awesome guest. He's coming back for part two, David Maples. He is a mental alchemist who uses mindfulness in his coaching. And I welcome you today. Thank you for being here, David.
Yes, thank you for having me back. And I'm so excited to continue our conversation.
Yeah, so please, guide us how to go from our suffering pain to a more aware and conscious of living each moment with presence. Like you call it, I've never seen this term before, but you call it time engagement. So
Yes.
let's just dive into this beautiful conversation.
Yeah, let's do it. So I know last time we kind of we went through the 5 kind of foundations that I talk about. And so let's just kind of start there, if you don't mind. So the first one I always talk about is our conditioning, right? It's our programming, it's our the way we were raised, all the things, the underlying beliefs that we kind of filter the world through. And then from there, that is what our beliefs help guide our actions and what we want to do and how we take on the world. So I go from our conditioning to our beliefs. And then from there, we start talking into what our actions and how we want to, like the things we want to take on. And then ultimately I talk about our time, because the big buzzword everybody talks about now is time management, right? And it's managing time. How do we manage time? When ultimately we're trying to do is manage how much time it takes for us to do certain things, or how much time we want to carve out to do certain things. So I say, well, it's not really about the time management, because time is what it is. We are only given the time we have is right now. So when we think about trying to manage time, what we're actually trying to do is manage our engagement with the time that we have, or with the project, or with the task that we have in our hand. So I say, listen, if we start focusing on time engagement rather than time management, that's when we start to really start to get back our control of what we think time management is. So it's more about time engagement, how you engage with the time that you have right now. And I think that's where most of us kind of have this process that our brains do without even us really knowing. This is where our conditioning comes in, is we take this past experience that we've had, and then we want to either try to avoid it or try to replicate it. So what we do is we project it into a future that hasn't happened yet. It says, oh, that was bad, so I want to avoid doing that in the future. Or that was good, so I want to try to redo that again in the future. But what happens is then we lose in the engagement of the time that we're actually in, which is right now. So the more that we're engaged with the time that we are presently in, the more that we're effectively managing time. Because now, instead of being disengaged, and let's say you have 30 minutes to complete a project and you feel super rushed, and all you're worried about, oh, is I'm not going to make the deadline, or I'm going to miss it. I only have 30 minutes. I need an hour. And what starts happening is you start to lose time, is because you're not engaging in the 30 minutes that you have, but you're so worried about like not having enough time, or not getting things done that you want to get done. And your mind starts racing ahead and saying, oh my gosh, if this doesn't happen, I'm gonna miss the deadline. My boss is gonna get mad at me. My spouse is gonna be mad at me. My kids, whatever it is. And so we lose that engagement, that time that we really have. And so it feels like we're losing time, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, we get in a hurry, and in here we open the door to being worried, like or fearful, right?
Yes, right. You're right. So now if we're engaging, let's say we have the 30 minutes for the task that we've set aside for ourselves, and we're worried or we're fearful about not completing whatever we need to, we're how much time are we losing, quote unquote, because we're not even engaged with the task at hand. We're so worried about the consequences that haven't even happened yet, right? So a lot of people put in time management tasks, but what they're accurately more called is time engagement. So there's a famous one called the Pomodoro, where you lot, I think it's 25 or 35 minutes at a time. And then once that time is up, you give yourself a 5-minute break. And then once you have 4 pomodoros, which is just a tomato in Italian, so I don't know, I don't really know exactly how they got that term, but after the 4th one, then you give yourself a bigger block of time to rest. But what that also does, it helps our brain like stay focused and engaged, because what neuroscience tells us is after a certain amount of time, you have a diminishing of returns on your engagement, because we can only stay focused for a limited amount of time. So if we're trying to stay focused for like an hour, for example, after about 20-30 minutes, your brain starts to just naturally decline in how much attention it can give to whatever you're focused on. So giving yourself that break after the 25 minutes, and it can be a small break, maybe 2, 3, 5 minutes, that you disengage, go do something else, go relax. The best thing to do is just kind of go and just be still for 5 minutes, right? And what that means by still doesn't mean you're just standing in the corner staring at the wall. What that means is you're able to disengage from whatever it is that you're doing and just focus on what's around you, right? And that's where I talk about mindfulness a lot, because mindfulness is being engaged in the present moment without your judgments, without your biases, without the anxiety, without the stress, without worrying about what happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future. It's being fully present and engaged with what you have. So if you could take 5 minutes away from your task and just enjoy your view, it doesn't matter if you live in the city, if you're in the country, if you've got uh, your kids, your pets, whatever it is, just be engaged with whatever's in front of you for those 5 minutes, and then return to your task. And what you'll realize is your brain kind of resets and allows you to stay focused for the next 25-30 minutes again. And then when that timer goes up, take your break. And then after like the 4th one, then you take that longer break and really start to recharge. And then while people are calling this time management, what you're actually doing is affecting your engagement with the time that you have. So it's not like I'm trying to introduce a whole new concept. What I'm saying is we've mislabeled time management as really, it's what we're trying to control is our engagement with the time that we have.
I love it, because I think that's what we need. Sometimes talking as let's just say as a teacher, as a mom, let's say in the home, okay, laundry has to be done, dishes have to be done, dinner has to be done. So sometimes I feel myself rushing.
Right.
And here the last couple of years, it's like I've learned to be more present. I'm still working on it.
Yes.
I'm still working on it. But it's like sometimes we get on it has to be done. We get on the mode where so you just want to check the mark that, okay, done.
Yeah.
And we get in the rush, but it's how important it is to be present and acknowledge that we're able to move, acknowledge that we can walk from the kitchen to the laundry and the washer and the dryer, to be able to do that. It's like I've learned to be more appreciative, because most of the time, here we go, I feel that, okay, I get to. But there are some days where it's like I I have to go back to my conditioning. I have to go back to the awareness. It's like, okay, where is this behavior coming from? Is it true? Okay, what action do I have to bottle that conditioning? That maybe it just pop up and I'm doing it, and I have to do it. Like going from I have to do it.
Yeah, well, so that's a great point, right? And I think a lot of us have been conditioned into saying I have to, or I should, right? Or I could have, right? All these different things, but what they do is when you think about that, I have to, or I should, all that actually does is add more pressure to whatever the situation is that you've already created some kind of pressure around. So I love your reframe and the saying that I get to, right? Because when you talk to yourself and you're using words like I get to, or look at the opportunity that I have in front of me versus I have to or I should, you're already alleviating some of that pressure that you've already added onto yourself. And by doing that, now you continue more, to your point, engaged in what you're doing. Because when we talk about the things I get to do versus the things I should do or I have to do, think about how much you're already engaged just by the language that you're using, right? So how many times do we come upon an opportunity where it's outside of like our normal whatever to-do list or things that we think we have to get done for that day, and now we are in our free time and we go, oh, I finally get to watch TV. Oh, I get to eat my dinner, or I get to whatever, I get to spend time with my kids, right? Versus, oh, I have to go to work. Oh, I should get up and do this, right? So those words alone in themselves help you get back engaged with what you're doing, right? So that it's not about managing the time that you have. It's about engaging the time that you have. And that starts with the language that you use. So I love that you said that, because how often, and that's a great way for anybody that's listening, is when you start hearing yourself talking to yourself, it's like, I have to do this, or I should do this. That's a great way to step back in that moment and say, wait a second, how engaged am I really in what I'm doing?
Yeah, because I was just having this conversation with my husband, because I'm trying to add the vocabulary in the family. So when I hear him say, I have to,
Mhm.
I had this conversation. I said, well, it would be wonderful, right? If you get to, right? And I said, because whenever you say, I've noticed, like, whenever he says I have to with a lot of intensity, he doesn't get it done. And I said, the reason why, I said, is because you're scared of the brain. The brain doesn't want to do anything that is difficult.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like your brain stops you. It's like, no, no, no. My job is to keep you alive. My job is to make sure that you function. You know, like your physiology goes, but your brain doesn't care if you're the mayor, the president, if you're a teacher, if, you know, that it doesn't care. It just wants to keep you alive. So language matters. So
100%.
yeah. So I said, whenever we say I have to, your brain automatically shuts down and is like, nope, you're not gonna count, with me to do that task. But if you begin to link the easy path, step one, step two, then your brain is more welcoming. It's like, okay, I'll help you.
Yeah. Well, so you're alluding to that connection between our conditioning and our beliefs. And the step in between that is the awareness, right? And so our vocabulary, the words that we use, especially with ourselves, helps raise that awareness. But what happens is, from an early on, we get conditioned by who? Our parents, people that we look up to, our peers, so, media, everything conditions us, especially when we're very young, right? From that 0 to 10 age, we get conditioned by all these different outputs. And so when we start to hear these words and how they're used with us and what we're doing, because as kids, I was always told, you have to clean up your room, otherwise you don't get dinner, right? You have to clean up your room or you don't get to go outside, right? So it's all these have tos. And so what we do is we start speaking that way to ourselves and say, oh, well, I have to be this way in order to get this. And what happens is when we keep using that language, all we're doing is rewiring those neural pathways in our brain to say, yep, that's what you have to do. That's what you should have to do. So as soon as you can start changing the language that you use around you, you also start to raise that awareness into your conditioning. And that's such a powerful, that's why words, I think I said this last time, words are not only descriptive, but they're creative, right? So when we start using these words of I have to and I should, you're creating pressure. You're not just describing the things you're doing, you're creating pressure around that. So to your point, when you get to say, I get to, not only are you raising your awareness around the conditioning that gave you those words, but you're also rewiring your brain to think a different way. So it's literally creating different neural pathways in your brain to be able to interact with whatever situation that you're in a less pressure like driven manner than the I have tos and I shoulds. So and for a lot of us, it's hard for us to recognize it in ourselves. So for you to say that to your husband, he may get annoyed at first and be like, oh gosh, here she goes again, right? But it's such a great way, because it's hard for us to break our own conditioning, because we just think that's the way reality is, right? So we get conditioned a certain way and ingrains our beliefs. And if everything is driven by our beliefs, right? The way that we act, the way we talk to ourselves and the world. So by raising that awareness, you're not only breaking your conditioning, but you're also like driving a little wedge into that belief. And look, we're battling millions of thoughts over years and decades of conditioning. So that one phrase, and that's where I think a lot of my clients, they get kind of frustrated at the beginning, because like, well, I can say that, but it doesn't really do anything. Well, look, it's your first time doing it in years or decades sometimes. So that first drop in the bucket may not seem like a lot, but after you keep putting more drops in there, and then you start to rewire that conditioning, the pathways start changing and your beliefs start changing little by little, right? We weren't like all of a sudden created these beliefs, and it wasn't just this one thing and all of a sudden, oh, now I believe this and that this is what I believe about myself. It happened over time, but we forget that because here we are in the present, and all we've known is this belief system that we've had. So changing those words, it's very subtle, but it's very powerful. And it's the way to keep doing it is what I ask my clients to do is how would you want to manifest this in the physical world, right? Because to your point, you say you hear your husband say, I have to or I should. You say, hey, wait a second. Wouldn't it be nice if you get to do these things? So if there was a way to trigger that for yourself, like, so a lot of times I'll use a little token, or like for me, I used to have really bad posture and I'd walk around and my shoulders were hunched. So what I used to, now I do is every time I see a doorway, when I walk through a doorway and I see it, I go, oh, that's a prompt for me to stand up straight, right? So what you're doing is bringing this idea out into the physical world, because without that prompting, it's really hard for us to see past our conditioning to say, oh, I say should and have to a lot. You wouldn't even notice it, right? So it's helping bringing that into the physical world. So for you, so Paolo, like, how would you, like, you notice that in your husband. Now, has he incorporated that more into his language now?
Well, we just talked about it, what, 2 days ago maybe, and it's
Okay.
something that it's a skill. It's like trying to learn
100%.
to ride a bike for the first time, right? So I feel like, oops, I should say, I should have said, it would be wonderful. It would be great if this, instead of have or should. Another one
Right.
is like, oh, I choose to. Like whenever I get annoying, or for the 5th time, Mom, I'm hungry. What can we eat? It's like, okay, I'm the mom. I choose to. Like, I choose to make this time pleasant. Because sometimes, you have to. Here we go again. It's like, it would be wonderful to always be pleasant, right, towards your kids. It would be wonderful, to always be that mom. There's like, mom always fix me something to eat with a big smile. So in reality, I've been doing this for 4 weeks. So last night I was a little bit exhausted. I'm like, what's wrong? My emotions were different. It's like, oh, I've been doing this and it's been wonderful. It's been good. But then you get tired, like you need just breathe in, breathe out. It's like, continue to choose to do it gladly.
Yeah, well, and that's it, right? And you're alluding to the other part of this aspect is your emotionality. It's really important to be in tune with that, right? But most of us, we think, oh, that whatever, it's my kids that caused me to be that way, or my spouse caused me that way, or my boss caused me that way. And we talked a little bit about this, but what happens is you get into these situations, and especially when you're tired or you're not at your best, we tend to react, right, in ways that we probably aren't the most empowering for us, right? And then we tend to blame the environment for causing, oh, it's because of so-and-so that I reacted this way. Well, that's a great insight into your conditioning, right? And if you can step back in that moment, it's not easy. If it was easy, everybody could do it, right? But if you could step back in that moment and truly understand and say, hey, wait a second, what's actually causing me to react this way? Is it really, truly my kids? Are they really going inside of me, creating this feeling of stress and anxiety and frustration? Or is it because, one, maybe you are tired, you didn't get enough sleep, maybe you're hungry, maybe you're thirsty, whatever the situation is, right? And to be able to step back and rather than react into the situation, then to your point, you get to actually choose how you want to react. Now, you can still choose to be cranky and mad and upset and frustrated, but at least you're taking ownership of that and not giving up control of your emotionality to the situation. And now you think about it, especially kids, right? Kids, I mean, how old is your youngest?
She's about to be 6 years old.
About to be 6, right? Do you want to give up your emotionality to a 6-year-old? Are you kidding me? You'd be all over the place, right? So that's where you could step back and say, wait a second, am I going to truly let this 6-year-old run my emotions and how I feel and how frustrated or elevated I am? Or am I going to take ownership of this in this moment and step back and say, wait a second, I'm choosing to be frustrated here. And that's okay if you choose it. Give yourself some grace around that and be okay with that choice, right? But here's the thing, is don't displace it out to the 6-year-old. If you're going to choose it, own it. And that means taking it on for what it is as your reaction and not something that like that your child is causing. Or like the worst is, I always say, hey, stop kicking the dog, right? The dog is just a dog, and the dog only knows what a dog does. But if you get frustrated and blame the dog, you end up kicking the dog, and the dog's like, the heck are you doing, right? So it's like you're giving up your control of your emotionality and physicality to this other entity that probably has no idea what's going on, right? Because they're dealing with their own stuff. So that's a great point. That's another access point to say, okay, how is my conditioning ruling my response to this, my reaction to this, rather than having the awareness to step back and say, okay, how do I want to choose to be in this moment, right? What do I get to do in this moment, right? Versus, oh, I have to be the perfect mom. And look, and that adds just even more pressure to you, right? I have to be the perfect mom and provide a meal with a smile on my face every night. It's like, holy cow. It's like, who said that?
Yeah. Yes. And having, here we go, is a muscle. And it's a blessing.
Yeah.
Learn to see that, to me, it's like, I love being a mom. It's a blessing. It's a blessing that I'm with them this summer, get to fix them breakfast, lunch, and dinner, snacks, snacks. So it's like, it's been 4 weeks. So yesterday, I noticed that, okay, here we go again. And then I was like, okay, it is, learn to see our blessings, whatever we're at. Now we're talking about being a mom, but it could be at work too. Right now, there is a lot of need for this in the workplace. A lot of us need to appreciate, we have a job, we get to bring our skills, we bring our smiles, we get to inspire, plant our seeds, versus, oh, here we go again.
Yeah. Well, it's, there's a great quote I love, and it says, what's the secret to happiness? It's wanting what you have, right? So instead of like, and I think we talked about this last time, was the appreciation, right? If you could show true gratitude for the things that you already have, that is the ultimate secret to happiness, because now you're not left wanting, you're not left like searching for something. You already have what you need and you're grateful for it. That is where we start. That's another gateway into that conditioning, is like, well, what's causing me not to be okay with the situation I'm in right now? Now, don't get me wrong, there are some circumstances that are horrific and that you don't want to be in, you want to get yourself out of. But if you can't, the only other option is either you resist it or you accept it, right? And most of us aren't in these dire situations. We're not locked up in prison, we're not in some POW camp. We are literally in a house with our family, or at a job that we choose to go to every day, but then we resist it at every opportunity, and we wonder why we're so frustrated and upset and exhausted. Well, the other option is if you accept what truly is. And I go through this, I'm going through this myself, right? It's this whole concept of surrender. And I think what a lot of people do is confuse surrender with giving up, right? So giving up is just allowing, like, you just give up, you don't take action, you're just kind of there. Where surrender is accepting what is in order to make choices and take actions based upon what actually is, and not what you're resisting to, right? So a lot of us, we see the outside environment and we think, okay, I want to change this outside environment, so I'm going to go over there and sit and try to fix this and change this and move this, and so that way it matches what I think it should be, right? Rather than, well, if I accept everything for what it is and then take action from there, you're more likely to have more an effect in that situation, rather than trying to take action from what you think it should be and trying to change the physical environment to match that, right? It's like walking outside and looking at the sun, and there's the sun, you go, why is the sun there? It should be over there, right? If you did that, people will be like, well, you're crazy. But what we do that with the people in our lives, with the situations in our lives all the time. It's like, oh, my mother-in-law, she should be this way. No, she is who she is. You're just resisting who she is, right? You're not accepting what she is. You're not surrendering to what she actually is. And that's what I mean by surrender versus giving up.
And here we go. Like, if you're in the workplace, or if you're talking about the mother-in-law, they're your teachers. Whatever
Right.
you're at right now and you're like struggling, is like, they are your teachers. I
Yeah.
believe, David, that I already have it all. I just have to organize it, maybe stretch my love, love a little bit more, learn to forgive a little bit more, heal, those past traumas that sometimes they just float around, and then
Sure.
you're like, oh my goodness, and like we talked on our last show, learn to just, like the wind, they just pass by, learn from it and move on, make room, let go of resentments so that you can have more room to enjoy, to love,
Yeah.
to forgive, to laugh. And here we go. That's just my belief. We already have it all. We have to learn to organize it.
Well, and you're touching upon back on kind of how we started the conversation, is that engagement versus management, right? So if you're resistant to what is, you're trying to manage everything. Whereas if you accept what is, you're engaged with it, right? Because it's hard to engage with something when you can't even accept it, right? So if we're fully resisting things, we're always in that management mode, in that control mode, in that fixed mode, right? Whereas if you're engaged, by default, if you are engaged with something or somebody, you are an acceptance of what they are or what it is, right? So it's now, you're not expending the energy on trying to change something that already is, right? You are
Yeah.
now engaged with something that is. So what you'll start to realize and you will start to notice is like, oh my gosh, the time that I have so much more. I have, not that you have more time, that you just utilize your time that much more effectively, right? And that's what everybody keeps talking about. Time management is trying. Oh, I want to use my time more effectively. Well, you can't manage the time. It's about being engaged with the time, because once you're engaged with the time, the first thing that comes with that engagement is that acceptance of what is. And when we let go of that resistance, then like think about how much energy that you can clear up by not resisting things. That's like I think we talked about that last time, was that's the definition of insanity, is trying to like resist what actually is, right? It's like, I don't want it to be this way, I'm going to fight tooth and nail, I don't care what you say, I don't care what you do, it's not that way, I'm going to change it, I'm going to change it, I'm going to change it. It's like, okay, good luck with that. And you may change it a little bit incrementally, but how much more effective would it be is if you could just accept what it is and then be engaged with it and then affect change that way.
Yes. And I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking as a leader, when you're training someone, you welcome them just as they are, and then you
Yeah.
continue, you guide them, you say, okay, this is what it has to be done, this is how it is, and then open the opportunity for them to grow. As a parent is the same thing. I tried to have a
Yeah.
conversation with my 17-year-old a while ago. I tried to engage, and I noticed, his facial expression, he wasn't for it. So I let it go. I said, okay, we'll talk about it later. So I accept what it is. I'm not
Yeah.
mad at it. Like, we talk about it later, because he wasn't ready for it. The time wasn't right. And here goes back to planting the like making the area fertile,
Mhm.
learning to, you might not agree with what's going on right now. I wish he would have listened to me, but I have to
Sure.
set the ground, what is fertile, in order for him to engage.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the workplace keeps popping up in my mind. Same thing in the workplace, like make the ground fertile for those that you need to listen to you, that they would listen, instead of like, oh, complaining.
Yeah.
uh I
Well,
mean,
no,
you have, go ahead.
go ahead. I was gonna say, no, that's a great point, right? Because especially as a parent, like you want to like convey what it is that you're trying to convey to your child. But if they're not hearing it or they're not ready, how much are they going to actually hear? And look, and by you telling them the same thing over and over again or louder, that's not going to help, right? So it's like when we're not ready to hear something, what happens when somebody tries to tell us even more forcibly? We get annoyed. We shut them
Yeah.
out. We just kind of like, we're like, I'm done with you, right? So when we flip it, and as a parent, we think, well, if I just say it louder and if I say it more, they're going to listen. Good luck with that, right? But to your
Yeah.
point, is if you can step back and let go of that ego and let go of like the pride and all that stuff that comes with being a parent, it's like, look, part of being a parent is helping your child get to a point where they do understand, where they can relate to the world in an empowering way. And all you're doing is teaching your child at that point is like, if you don't get what you want, be louder and be more annoying. It's like, is that what we're really trying to teach our children?
Yeah,
right?
and
So if to your point, if you can step back and let that ground become more fertile in the sense that, hey, I'm just going to let it lie. And look, it's there are certain circumstances where, like, if your children are not doing what they need to be doing and they're engaging themselves, that's a different situation, right? But how often is that the case? Most of the time, it's just us trying to put our will onto somebody or something. And so when that doesn't happen, we get frustrated and we get annoyed and we all do all these things. But if you were to just step back for a moment, give them that space, and it kind of goes back to the Pomodoro effect we talked about, was if you're engaging in something, it's just not working, take a break, step away, and then come back and see how much more effective you can be. So same concept, right? And whether it's children, whether it's coworkers, whether it's family members, it doesn't matter. It's all you are training that other person. When you're communicating, what we forget is you're training this other person on how you communicate. And if you're training your child that, hey, if I don't get what I want, I'm just gonna get more loud and more persistent. So what they're learning is, if I don't get what I want, I just become louder and more persistent. And then what happens is your child comes back and they start doing that, and then you get more upset, and it just starts to build upon each other, right? Instead of taking that step back. And if you can teach your child, like, hey, wait a second, if the situation is not going the way I want it, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to take a breath. You take a breath, and then we'll talk about it later.
yes, because every behavior is taught. We observe, like how we handle money. We learn it from our
Yes.
parents, for whoever you grew up. And if you don't like it, then we have to learn to change it. Like the way we behave in our relationships. If seems like you cannot find the right guy, what pattern, what
Right.
pattern comes up each time, because we like it or not, we just, each behavior is taught. So our
Right.
brain just picked it up when you were 10, 15, 20, who knows? And we just have to, work towards that if we don't like it,
Yeah.
and there is a lot of things to improve.
Yeah.
Well,
and I would say we don't have to, right?
it's true. Yes. Here we go. Thank you. It would be, yeah. Thank you for guiding me.
Well, what I always say is, look, and we do this all the time, right? All of us do this a lot. Is when we say the have to, and I say, look, there's nothing really you have to do besides maybe die, maybe pay taxes, right? There's nothing really you have to do. There's consequences to things that you do or don't do, and that's what we want to look at. Instead of saying, oh, I have to do this, it's like, well, what's the consequences if I don't change my pattern? Well, you're going to keep getting the same guys. You're going to keep running into the same people. So that's a consequence. That's an effect of not changing your habits or your patterns, right? If you want something to be different, then that is where you want to create different habits, different patterns, right? And so I don't remember who I think it was Einstein that said you can't, like, to change the circumstances you're in, you can't use the same thinking that got you into that circumstance, right? I know I butchered that quote up, but you get the sentiment, right? It's just, if we keep trying to attack the situation with the same mindset that got us in that situation, guess what's going to happen? That situation is just going to keep coming up and coming up and coming up. So to your point, let's take the have to out of there, because you don't have to. People live great, amazing lives by doing the same thing over and over and over again, right? But if you want a different result, there's different things that you can do to get those different results, right? So that's all it is. It's like, if you want different results, then take different actions, right? You don't have to, but it's like, how much do you want to keep saying that, oh, I'm doing, and how many times do you hear people say, oh, I've done everything I know possible? Well, that's a lie.
Oh, yes.
You've probably done one or two things differently and said, oh, that didn't work, so I give up. Right?
Yes, their mindset. And here, it's a mindset. It's like, I've tried, and I know people, it's like, I've tried everything and I'm still here. I'm still stuck. And, oh, well, what about this? No, I know, no, I know that. And whenever we say, I know, we close our brain to continue to see possibilities, to see the solution. So write it down. When we express, oh, I know that already, then we close down our beautiful brain to see the possibilities, to see it.
So what I love is when I hear people say, oh, I've tried everything, right? I've literally tried everything. I love to ask, okay, well, list off all the things you've tried. Please share with me, right? And after about 3, 4, maybe 5 things, their brain starts to go blank and they don't really have more things to come up with. And that's partly what happens is like our brains are so biased to efficiency, right? That we think when we try 3, 4, 5 things, well, we've literally tried everything. Okay, so that's another great point. And the other part about that is writing it down. To your point, is like when somebody says that, says, "Oh, I've tried everything." That's the first question I ask. Well, tell me everything that you've tried, please, right? Because I'm curious. And you come with that curiosity mindset. It's like, well, if you tried everything, it didn't work, but I want to know what not to try, right? And so they start, and literally, if you can get them to list off these things, then they really see how paltry their list is. It's like a list of 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 things. But beyond that, most people don't have a list longer than that. And what that starts to do is starts to train your brain again to say, oh, I haven't tried everything, right? But if we keep telling ourselves this and keep retelling that story over and over and over and again, that our brains, we say, oh, we've tried everything, well, guess what you start to believe? You've tried everything.
You tried everything.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. And what the reality comes down to is you've tried maybe a handful of things and that's it, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then then after that is like blaming the government, blaming the boss, the country.
But that's kind of we've been conditioned that way, right? Is to believe that the circumstances affect and dictate how we are going to be. Or what's even worse is we think, oh, once I go on vacation, or once I have this job, or once I have this person, or once I make enough money, then I'll be happy. It's like, wow, what a disempowering way to live your life, right? Because then you are given to the whims of your circumstances rather than being the generator of your emotions and your circumstances. And that's what I think a lot of people confuse, is because we've been so conditioned from a very early age to say, well, look, once you do this, or once you have this, then you're going to be this way. And once we start to realize that, oh, wait a second, the circumstances around me have nothing to do with my emotionality and how my reaction to them, right? But when you're conditioned, you don't have that choice. You just automatically react. And what happens, it happens so quickly, is that we forget we're the ones generating those emotions. We're generating those beliefs. We're generating those actions that follow that. But when we've been conditioned that way for decades and decades and decades, it happens so quickly, we collapse, that the environment is causing our emotionality or our actions versus the other way around.
Now that you say that, there's one of my favorite quotes from Viktor Frankl. And he goes something like, between the stimulus,
yeah,
and the response, there is a gap, and that is our opportunity to choose how to act. And that really began to change my life, like a couple of years ago. And I was like, yep, okay, I'm responsible for my emotions. I'm responsible for my behavior. So yes, we get to choose. We get to choose how to act. But it has to. Here we go. It has to be a choice. I mean, it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be a choice. But I committed to generate beautiful emotions, and still it's a work in progress. There is still days, like last night, like I was telling you. It's like, oh, there is something off. I don't like this. I don't like this anger, or this type of emotion. This is not me. So we have to work. No, we don't have to, but you choose to. I get to work with those emotions, because I want to generate, the gratitude. I want to generate good example for my children, because if I can multiply beautiful kids, beautiful citizens, then I'm doing my job.
Well, and you bring up a good point, is because think about the things that we get frustrated over, that in the big picture of things are pretty small, right? In the sense of the impact, and really how much it affects our lives, right? But then when we get faced with these big, massive things, like loved ones passing away, or losing a job, or financial burdens, whatever it may be, is then that's when our true kind of conditioning comes out. It's how do we react to those things, right? What do we do in the face of those things. And to your point, most of us are just reacting to those things and not actually choosing, right? And so that moment that Viktor Frankl talks about is, without that awareness, we're not even present to that moment.
Okay.
Right? It's just something happens, and then there's our reaction, and the people go, well, I didn't even have a moment to choose. Well, you're right, because your conditioning had you react in a certain way given the circumstances, right? And that's what's living an unengaged, a disengaged life, right? But when you're fully engaged with what's actually happening, you get to see this stimulus, and then there's that gap before the response, or to be more accurate, there's that gap before you choose whatever the action is that you want to do, right? And that's the difference between living this like a time engaged life versus a time managed life. When you manage time, you're more about the reaction about what's happening. When you're engaged with time, you're more choosing on how to react.
I love it. Yes. How beautiful that, is the awareness that goes in between.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, how am I choosing to act? What's that behavior that, I want to
Well,
represent
and you
right now?
think about it, is most of our conditioning was based in kind of a mentality of fear or lacking, right? So when we have a stimulus, the way that most people react is in a way that would be quote unquote fearful, or in a way of scarcity, right? Where if we truly were going to choose on how we wanted to react, if we could sit back and really be in control of how we reacted, would you really want to react in a fearful or scarcity model way? Like, no, but we do it. It's because we've been so conditioned in that way. And look, we talked about this last time. It's generational, right? Our parents were conditioned that way. Their parents were conditioned that way. So here we are, is this product of all these generations before us, and society is set up in a way where it says, look, if you get this, then I don't. And wow, what a scary way to live life, right? So then when we see something that triggers that scarcity for us, we react in a way of like, oh, I better grab it, or I better get it, because if I don't get mine now, then I'm not going to get it, right? And it's like, so most of us, we think we're actually choosing, but we're reacting based upon our conditioning. And that's where, if you can step back and have that moment of awareness between the stimulus, whatever it is, and our reaction to it, how many of us would really choose to react the ways that we do? And we all do it, right? How many times have we been emotionally stirred up, and it's like 5, 10, 30 seconds, maybe a couple of minutes, maybe a couple of days later, we're like, oh my gosh, I'm still upset about this. Like, what happened? Like, do I really want to choose to feel this way for X amount of time? And if you truly had control or awareness around our emotions, how quickly would we let go of emotions like fear and anger and frustration and anxiety and all those kind of things, right? Would you really choose to hold on to that if you had the choice in that moment, right? And that's another gateway into our conditioning and our awareness. It's like, how often have you been stuck in an emotional state without you really choosing to be there?
What are some strategies? What are some techniques that you would advise our beautiful audience to do before they have to reply to the text, before they have to reply to the email, before they're dealing with, they're in that space, and they want to do good, but those emotions, sometimes they just bring you down. So what are some of the strategies that you would give us?
Yeah, so in those kind of situations where you do have that time, like an email or a text, where you can literally not have to respond right in that second, right? It goes back to that old tried and true method of just count to 10 and just take a breath. Because when you can step back and really, because the other thing, look, most of us, when we're triggered by something that's emotional, that's frustrating, anxiety driven, whatever it is, that's stressful, is we feel it in our bodies. Right. So taking that step back isn't just about taking that step back and just going, okay, I'm frustrated, and just sitting here for 10 minutes or 10 seconds. Right. It's when you take that step back, it's really check into your body. Like, what's going on? Do you feel tension? Do you feel the blood rushing through your body? Do you feel like tight? Do you feel like your face is locked up? Like, where in your body are you feeling this? Right. And what that does is give you a window into, like, are you really choosing to react this way? Or is this something that's already happened because of your conditioning, right? And so it's easier said than done in those moments. Now, the way to get there on a more regular basis is a check-in or meditation or praying or whatever it is you want to call it. But the idea is to set aside everything else and just stay focused on what your thoughts are, right? Because what I thought when I started my meditation practice, I thought meditation was about emptying your thoughts. And I'd get so frustrated because if you ever tried to stop your thoughts, good luck. It just keeps piling on and piling on and piling on. What I realize now for me, it's like a metaphor. If you're on the corner of the busy street in your town and there's cars passing by and people walking by and you're sitting there on the corner. Now, if I told you, okay, you have to memorize every single car, the color, every person that walks by, what they're wearing, your mind would go crazy because you're trying to catalog all these things and trying to figure it out. But rather what meditation is allowing the cars to pass, allowing the people to pass without having to attach any kind of meaning to it, without having to remember it, just seeing it for what it is. It's just a passing by of this person or of this car, rather than then sitting there trying to make meaning of every stimulus that comes by. And that's the same thing with our thoughts. So when you're in meditation, it's not about trying to clear your thoughts, your mind of thoughts. It's rather recognizing when a thought comes up and letting it go or letting it pass by, or not chasing it down to whatever level that we chase down these thoughts, right? Because if we truly had control of our thoughts, that means we'd have to think of the thought before we think it. It's like, who's ever done that, right? And so like, when you sit there and in the meditation mode, and what that does is allow you to recognize that thoughts are just thoughts. There's these transient appearances in our consciousness. They pop up, they come, they go. But what happens is most of us take these thoughts as truths, as like this is who I am. They came from me, so they has to be me. This has to be what it is, right? And it goes back to the have tos, right? And the shoulds and all this other stuff. Oh, I had that thought. I should chase that down. Wait a second. So what that allows you to do is, if you can do that in that space of that calm space and that quiet space, and the more you do that, now you get into a situation, and here's a real life conversation. Somebody triggers you and your thing comes up and you say, oh, I'm going to say this. It's like, wait a second. That's just a thought. I don't have to say that. That's not something like, if you have a thought, think about if you had to say every thought that came about in your head, you'd be committed, right? I mean, that's what the difference is. When you see people walking by on the streets and they're muttering to themselves, we think, oh my gosh, this person's crazy. Well, step back a second. If you verbalized every single thought that you had, you'd be exactly like that person. The only difference is you don't say it out loud.
Yeah, you're right. Right? Yes.
Right. So that's what it comes down to, is recognizing that our thoughts are just thoughts, and we don't have to chase them down. We don't have to react to them. We don't have to even believe them. Right. And so it's that separation. I love that you brought up the Viktor Frankl quote, right? You could even take it to that level. It's like, if you take the thought as the stimulus, and then our reaction is either whether to believe it, to act upon it, or just let it go. Well, that's where the awareness comes in. Is if the thought is the stimulus, then the awareness comes in and says, okay, what do I want to do with that thought? Do I want to chase it? Do I want to believe it? Do I want to act upon it? And that's where you start to take back your agency of control in that situation.
I love it. I love it. We're almost out of time. Where can we find you?
Yeah, so the best way is my website. It's just www.carpedmlife.com. It's CARPE, like carpe, the Latin, DM, my initials, and then life.com. Or on LinkedIn is where I'm the most active, just David Maples. You'll find me, Mental Alchemist. I post Monday through Friday about these types of topics. So yeah, those are the two best ways to get the whole thing.
Yes, and I'm going to make sure to write down his website in the description of the YouTube video. So do you have a last message before we go? We have about 30 seconds.
Yeah, no, I just thank you. And look, everybody is on their journey, and no matter where you think you are, where you should be, you're exactly where you need to be.
Yes, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you all, everybody who tuned in and got to listen to our conversation today. Please share this video with anybody you think that would benefit from it. You can go to my YouTube channel, Paola Guthrie. and watch the replay of this video. You can click like, you can subscribe if you want to. Remember that you are the only one that can give power to your talents. You're the only one that can give life to your dreams. This show can also be heard on Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out spanglishworld.ca for all news and programming. Spanglish World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Blessings, blessings. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.